finally crashed. It served me well for many, many years, but this last vacation just did it in. So I don't know if I can see comments while we go. Um, and I hope I'm on the right channel. So we'll see what happens. It's late for me to read. And I'm trying to see if I can find... Well, I can see the chat there. Yeah, but I don't know if I'm on the right channel. And now I don't know where... Oh, I turned the camera. That's why it went black for a second. But somebody's here, so that I think means, hey, Fareed. Thank you. I'm trying to figure this out on my iPhone. I don't think Chapter 5, The Jackal, is very long. And if that's the case, I may just read 5 and then try and do a little of Fahrenheit 451. But I do have my work computer. I just try not to use it for personal stuff. So we'll see how the iPhone does. It might stream even better. Who knows? So Chapter 5, The Jackal, in my version, it's page 75. I think a lot of y'all have a different version. There are so many printed editions of A Tale of Two Cities. So to catch up, we just are celebrating the end of the trial, and Sidney Carton has been introduced as kind of a counterpoint. He's a foil to Charles Darnay, who was the one on trial for treason. As it turned out, it was kind of a setup. And so now we're learning more about Sidney Carton, and they're the two lookalikes. That's why I say, remember, a foil is a character where one character plays off the other character. So you might have somebody who's really outgoing and charming and cheerful and happy, but evil underneath it all. And then they have this counterpoint that's dark and brooding, the typical romantic Byronic hero, dark and brooding, but very, very good underneath it all. And those are they're playing characteristics off of one another. You've got a lot of foils that are going on in stories. And guys, I think I will make... Oh, there are other people. My trip was fantastic. I had all 5 of my kids together. Thanks, Fareed, for asking. And it went really well, and the beach was beautiful until today. It was really rainy coming back. So that's perfect. If you have to leave, you want to leave a rainy beach instead of a sunny beach. And I live with my sunscreen and my hat, and I wear like what they call rash guard, swimwear, where it's all long, so it covers everything so I don't burn, because I just historically burn. So the jackal. A jackal is a character that's, not a character, it's an animal that is very predatory and very aggressive. And this is after they're discussing the trial. Those were drinking days, and most men drank hard. So very great is the improvement time has brought about in such habits that a moderate statement of the quantity of wine and punch detriment to his reputation as a perfect gentleman would seem, in these days, a ridiculous exaggeration. So drinking a lot wasn't a big deal back then. The learned profession of the law was certainly not behind any other learned profession in its bacchanalian propensities. Bacchus is the god of wine, and so, if you have a tendency to be a drinker, it was no problem. Neither was Mr. Stryver, already fast shouldering his way to a large and lucrative practice behind the compeers in this particular, any more than the drier parts of the legal race. Probably more like copiers. A favorite of the Old Bailey, and remember I told you the Old Bailey is like the courthouse, but also the prison. A favorite at the Old Bailey, and eke at the sessions, Mr. Stryver had been cautiously to hew away the lower staves of the ladder on which he mounted. Sessions and Old Bailey had now to summon their favorite, especially to their lounging arms, and shouldering itself towards the visage of the Lord Chief Justice in the Court of King's Bench, the florid countenance face of Mr. Stryver might be daily seen, bursting out of the bed of wigs, like a great sunflower pushing its way at the sun from among a rank garden full of flaring companions. Oh, that's the compressor of my neighbor next door. Sorry about that. Is it really annoying? Because it'll turn off in a second, but if I go in, it'll really slow me down because I'll have to turn lights on and set things up, and it'll be very difficult. It's just, we're already using air conditioners down here, believe it or not. Do you want me to read louder, or is the sound super annoying for Reed? Just waiting for you to answer, because I hate to keep going if you can't hear me at all. It's not that bad. Okay, this doesn't pop up. Thanks for the answer. And Mr. Johnson, or Miss Johnson, it's hard for me to read this. The sound's not too bad. Thank you, Emma. Mr. Johnson. And then there were none. I'm glad it's helping you. So glad you're reading. Good job. All right, I'm going to keep reading. It had once been noted at the bar that while Mr. Stryver was a glib man and an unscrupulous and a ready and a bold, he had not that faculty of extracting the essence from a heap of statements which is among the most striking and necessary of the advocate's accomplishments. But a remarkable improvement came upon him as to this. The more business he got, the greater his power seemed to grow at getting at its pith and marrow. And however late at night he sat carousing with Sidney Carton, he always had his points at his fingers' end in the morning. Sidney Carton, so no matter how much carousing he did, he pulled it together for work. Sidney Carton, idlest and most unpromising of men, was Stryver's great ally. They were friends. What the two drank together between Hilary Term and Michaelmas might have floated a kingship. They drank a lot during the holiday season. Stryver never had a case in hand anywhere but Carton was there. They were always together on every case. But Carton was there with his hands in his pockets, staring at the ceiling of the court, just like we saw him in the court before. They went the same circuit, and even there they prolonged their usual orgies late into the night. I was trying to debate, do I want to read that or not, and determine is that the same meaning back then, but I don't know the answer to either, so I just read it. Going home stealthily and unsteadily to his lodging, like a dissipated cat. At last it began to get about among such as were interested in the matter, that although Sidney Carton would never be a lion, he was an amazingly good jackal, and that he rendered suit and service to Stryver in that humble capacity. 10 o'clock, sir, said the man at the tavern, whom he had charged to wake him. 10 o'clock, sir. What's the matter? 10 o'clock, sir. What do you mean? 10 o'clock at night? Yes, sir. Your honor told me to call you. Oh, I remember. Very well, very well. After a few dull efforts to get to sleep again, which the man dexterously combated by stirring the fire continuously for 5 minutes, for 5 minutes, he got up, dressed his hat on, and walked out. He turned into the temple, and having revived himself by twice pacing the pavements of King's Bench Walk and paper buildings, turned into the Stryver chambers. The Stryver clerk, who never assisted at these conferences, had gone home, and the Stryver principal opened the door. He had his slippers on and a loose bedgown like a dressing robe, and his throat was bare for the greater ease. He didn't have a high necktie or anything on. He had that rather wild, strange, seared marking about the eyes, which may be observed at all free livers of this class, from the portrait of Jeffreys downward, and which can be traced under various disguises of art through the portraits of every drinking age. You're a little late, Memory, said Stryver. About the usual time. It may be a quarter of an hour later. They went into a dingy room lined with books and littered with papers where there was a blazing fire. A kettle steamed upon the hob. A hob, for those of you who are American, is a cooktop, and they always have water on to boil for tea. And in the midst of the wreck of papers, a table shone with plenty of wine upon it, and brandy, and rum, and sugar and lemons. You have had your bottle, I perceive, Sidney. 2 tonight, I think. I've been dining with the day's client, or seeing him dine. It's all one. That was a rare point, Sidney, that you brought to bear upon the identification. How did you come by it? When did it strike you? He's saying, wow, that was a good twist where you compared yourself to Sidney Carton to Charles Darnay, and it was really helpful. How'd you come up with that idea? And he says, I thought he was a rather handsome fellow, because he looks like him, remember? And I thought I should have been much the same sort of fellow if I had had any luck. Mr. Stryver laughed till he took his precocious paunch. Till he shook his precocious paunch, like his belly. You and your luck, Sidney. Get to work, get to work. Sullenly enough, the jackal loosened his dress, went into an adjoining room, and came back with a large jug of cold water, a basin, and a towel or two. Steeping the towels in the water and partially wringing them out, he folded them on his head in a manner hideous to behold, sat down at the table, and said, Now I'm ready. So he's trying to sober up. Not much boiling down to be done tonight, Memory, said Mr. Stryver gaily, as he looked about his papers. How much? Only 2 sets of them. Give me the Divorce first. There they are, Sidney. Fire away. The lion then composed himself on his back on a sofa on one side of the drinking table. So the lion is Stryver, and Sidney Carton is the jackal. While the jackal sat on his own paper-bestrewn table, proper, on the other side of it with the bottles and glasses ready to his hand. Both resorted to the drinking table without stint, but each in a different way. The lion, for the most part, reclining with his hands in his waistband, looking at the fire, or occasionally flirting with some lighter documents. The jackal, with knitted brows and intent face, so deep in his task that his eyes did not even follow the hand he stretched out for his glass. So what we're learning is Stryver is the charming one, the speaking one, but not the thinking one. He's the lion. He's going to lead everything, but the jackal is shrewd. The jackal is, even though he's drinking constantly, he can decipher all this hard work, all this legal paper, and he's the one that can formulate the case and solve it. So that's why they always partner together. And we already know that Sidney Carton doesn't think well of himself, and we're not sure yet why he thinks he has no luck. 2 or 3 times the manner in hand became so naughty that the jackal found it imperative on him to get up and steep his towels anew, get them wet again. From these pilgrimages to the jugs, so from these trips, from the jugs and basin, he returned with such eccentricities of damp headgear as no words can describe, which were made the more ridiculous by his anxious gravity. At length, the jackal had got together a compact repast for the lion, and proceeded to offer it to him. The lion took it with care and caution, made his selection from it and his remarks upon it, and the jackal assisted both. When the repast was fully discussed, the lion put his hands in his waistband again and lay down to meditate. The jackal then invigorated himself with a bumper for his throttle and a fresh application to his head, and applied himself to the collection of a second meal. This was administered to the lion in the same manner, and was not disposed of until the clocks struck 3 in the morning. So the meal is the information that they're learning, and he can take it apart and he can give it to Stryver. And now we've done, Sidney. Fill a bumper of punch, said Mr. Stryver. The jackal removed the towels from his head, which had been steaming again, shook himself, yawned, shivered, and complied. You are very sound, Sidney, in the matter of those crown witnesses today. Every question told. I always am sound, am I not? Like, I'm always good at what I do. I don't gainsay it. What has roughened your temper? Put some punch to it and smooth it again. With a deprecatory grunt, the jackal again complied. The old Sidney Carton of Old Shrewsbury School, said Stryver, nodding his head over him as he reviewed him in the present and the past. The old seesaw Sidney. Up one minute and down the next, now in spirits and now in despondency. Ah, returned the other, sighing. Yes, the same Sidney with the same luck. Even then I did exercises for other boys and seldom did my own. And why not? God knows. It was my way, I suppose. Like, he just can't perform for himself when it's a test or whatever. He would help his buddies out at school, but he couldn't do it for himself. And his partner, Stryver, asked him why not. He said, I don't know. It's just my character. Carton, said his friend, squaring himself at him with a bullying air, as if the fire grate had been the furnace in which sustained endeavor was forged, and the one delicate thing to be done for the old Sidney Carton of Old Shrewsbury School was to shoulder him into it. Your way is, and always way was, a lame way. You summon no energy and purpose. Look at me. Oh, botheration, returned Sidney with a lighter and more good-humored laugh. Don't you be moral. How have I done what I've done, said Stryver. How do I do what I do? Partly through paying me to help you, I suppose, but it's not worth your while to apostrophize me or the air about it. What you want to do, you do. You were always in the front rank, and I was always behind. I had to get into the front rank. I was not born there, was I? I was not present at the ceremony, but my opinion is you were, said Carton. At this he laughed again, and they both laughed. Before Shrewsbury, and at Shrewsbury, and ever since Shrewsbury, that's their school, pursued Carton, you have fallen into your rank, and I have fallen into mine. Even when we were fellow students, in the student quarter of Paris, picking up French and French law and other French crumbs that we didn't get much good of, you were always somewhere, and I was always nowhere. And whose fault was that? Upon my soul, I am not sure that it was not yours. You were always driving and riving and shouldering and pressing to that restless degree that I had no chance of my life but in rest and repose. It's a gloomy thing, however, to talk about one's past with the day breaking. Turn me into some other direction before I go. Well then, pledge me to the pretty witness, said Stryver, holding up his glass. Are you turned in a pleasant direction? Apparently not, for he became gloomy again. Pretty witness, he muttered. They're talking about Lucy Manette. Looking down into his glass. I've had enough of witnesses today and tonight. Who's your pretty witness? The picturesque doctor's daughter, Miss Manette. She pretty, is she not? No. Why, man alive, she was the admiration of the whole court. Rot the admiration of the whole court. Who made the Old Bailey a judge of beauty? She was a golden-haired doll. Do you, Sidney, said Mr. Stryver, looking at him with sharp eyes and slowly drawing a hand across his florid face, do you know, I rather thought at the time that you sympathized with the golden-haired doll, and you were quick to see what happened to the golden-haired dog. Quick to see what happened. If a girl, doll or no doll, swoons within a yard or two of a man's nose, he can see it without a perspective glass. He's trying to play off that he's not interested in Lucy Manette. I pledge you, but I deny the beauty. Now I'll drink no more drink. I'll get to bed. When his host followed him out on the staircase with a candle to light him down the stairs, the day was coldly looking in through its grimy windows. When he got out of the house, the air was cold and sad, the dull sky overcast, the river dark and dim, the whole scene like a lifeless desert, and wreaths of dust were spinning round and round before the morning blast, as if the desert sand had risen far away, and the first spray of it in its advance had begun to overwhelm the city. Waste forces within him, and a desert all around. This man stood still on his way across a silent terrace and saw for a moment, lying in the wilderness before him, a mirage of honorable ambition, self-denial, and perseverance. This is Carton's vision of the future. And this is some foreshadowing. If you're in an AP or honors course, pay attention to this part. In the fair city of this vision, there were airy galleries from which the loves and graces looked upon him, gardens in which the fruits of life hung ripening, waters of hope that sparkled in his sight. A moment, and it was gone. Climbing into a high chamber in a well of houses, he threw himself down in his clothes on a neglected bed, and its pillow was wet with wasted tears. So he sees wonderful things in this moment of vision. Sadly, sadly, the sun rose. It rose upon no sadder sight than the man of good abilities and good emotions, incapable of their directed exercise, incapable of his own help and his own happiness, sensible of the blight upon him, and resigning himself to let it eat him away. So Dickens is reminding us of the everyman, the common man, and the fact that how you're born, the circumstances you're born into, have more to do with how you turn out than the work you do or your own gifts or abilities. So that's a little bit of commentary from the author there. So that is only 20 minutes, so it'll be a short read. But I've got the compressor going. Yeah, I really like these characters, the jackal and the lion. And our book is I try and tell y'all some of the teaching parts. So I want to keep doing that for those of you that are with me. So we're in the 4th unit, and it's after the trial. And this is books chapter 4 through 6, which is what we're in right now. There are lots of different questions. How does Darnay feel about Lucy? Dr. Manette has a surprising reaction to Darnay. What was it? How does Carton suggest his own feelings toward Lucy as he talks with Darnay, as he talks with Stryver? Why does it shift? What do you think's going on there? What information would Mr. Lorry like to have about Dr. Manette? We haven't learned about Miss Pross yet, so that comes later. Characters. Stryver is obviously successful largely because of his friendship with Carton. And we talk about what are the descriptions of them. Stryver is mentioned as having shouldered his way into a group. The word is mentioned again. What do you think this use of the word shoulder means? So when you shoulder into something, you have to push in. So like he's determined maybe? How does Stryver show his lack of sensitivity in dealing with Carton? And there's a lot of answers to that that would be an interesting discussion. And jackals, this is a little background. Jackals hunted their prey, their predators, and then they consumed them. The jackal being called the lion provider. Why is Stryver called the lion and Carton the jackal? So if Carton is the one giving the information, a lion provider, the jackal is the one who brings the food to the lion. What is Carton doing for Stryver? And sometimes Dickens is known for naming his characters with double meaning. So his Stryver, Stryver, but to strive for something, Striver. What does that mean to be a striver? A person who works for something they want. So it says notice that play on name. And that comes later in the book, or later in the chapters. We don't get to that part yet. They talk about alcoholism. I'm not going to get into all of that, but let's talk about words in their context. Beneficial, fervently, dispersed, terrestrial, lucrative, and let's see what page we were on. Yeah, through 80. Adjoining, complied, and that's the last. So let's talk about each of those words and their meanings. So our choice in beneficial, the word in context of the story, the sound of her voice, the light of her face, the touch of her hand had a strong beneficial influence with him almost always. That was Lucy and her influence on her father, Dr. Manette. Context clues. If you find a low sugar diet beneficial, it makes sense to continue with it. So our choices are controlling, powerful, helpful, or negative. So the word beneficial, a benefit. What is the meaning of that word? Controlling, powerful, helpful, negative. And I'll read number 2 and then I'll come back and answer number 1. Fervently. So the context in the story, Mr. Darnay had kissed her hand fervently and gratefully. And in context clues, the scientist talked fervently of the need to control pollution if life is to survive on Earth. So the choices are monotonously, warmly, hesitantly, foolishly. I don't like the definition of any of those. Let's see. Yeah, that's what I thought, but I wouldn't have used that word to describe fervently. So let's go back to beneficial. Remember the 4 choices: controlling, powerful, helpful, negative. So the answer to beneficial is helpful. How many of you got that right if you're playing along at home? Third word, dispersed. And in context of the story, the friends of the acquitted prisoner had dispersed. And it goes on. And the context clue, when the police arrived, the crowd dispersed and the streets were soon empty. Now that's a good context clue. So the choices are shouted, gathered together, wept, or scattered. So some of the times if you don't know what the word means, then it's going to be hard to do the definition. But to scatter something, you scatter seeds into the ground. So let's go back to fervently. Is it monotonously, warmly, hesitantly, foolishly? So they're giving the definition here as warmly. So you do it fervently with passion. I can see where it would be warm, but I wouldn't have, with intensity, I wouldn't have used that word warmly as my definition. And sometimes that happens on SAT and ACT. The word they give is the right answer. It's not the ideal answer. Terrestrial. Some of you that are sci-fi fiction fans will know terrestrial. Do you feel yet that you belong to this terrestrial scheme? Again, Mr. Tarnay, context. The mystic was more concerned with affairs and concerns of the spirit world than the terrestrial one. Now that one is a good hint. So the opposite, what is the opposite of the clouds in the sky and the spirit world? So think about terrestrial. Let's go back and define dispersed. So dispersed, shouted, gathered together, wept, scattered. So the definition for number 3, dispersed equals scattered, to be all different directions. Lucrative is the next word. Stryver was shouldering his way, remember we're talking about shouldering his way to a large and lucrative practice. And then the next term, which is appropriate for what I'm doing, teaching may not be a lucrative profession, but it provides satisfactions not dependent on money. That's so true, but I long for the day that I could have made a full living teaching and not had to work 4 jobs. So what do you think lucrative has to do with? And the 4 choices: imposing, yielding wealth, famous, or complicated. Let's go back and define terrestrial: pertaining to the earth, carefully planned, fully developed, navigational. So terrestrial, pertaining to or having to do with the earth. I hope you guys are getting them right. These are great ways to build vocabulary. Adjoining. Adjoining, the jackal went into an adjoining room. The young couple went into an adjoining state for a marriage license because they could not get one in the state in which they resided. And the choices are large, bordering, legal, pleasant. So let's go back to lucrative. The definition of lucrative: imposing, yielding wealth, famous, complicated. Lock in your answers. Yielding wealth. So lucrative has to do with giving you money. And our last one, complied. The jackal shook himself, yawned, shivered, and complied. As an alien, Jan was requested to register periodically, and he complied, reporting twice a year to the registry office. So those choices are disagreed, seemed indifferent, resisted, or cooperated. Let's go back and get our answer to adjoining, large, bordering, legal, or pleasant. Bordering. Adjoining something is next to it. And our last answer, to comply, disagree, seem indifferent, resist, or cooperate. So he complied, he cooperated. So guys, that's a great way to learn words, to work with them, to practice them. Don't do tons of words at a time. If you use, what's the vocabulary flashcard one? I can't think of it. It's a great Quizlet. If you use Quizlet, limit your lists and really nail 10 of them. And once you have all 10 of them good, like if you have a really big spelling list to practice for school, nail the 10 on Quizlet and then move to the next 10. Don't try and do 20 words at once. Your short-term memory just won't remember it. But engage with the words the way we just did. All right, well, I appreciate you guys being here. If you haven't subscribed, I encourage you to do it. Sorry about the compressor. Louisiana, it's something we're used to. I don't even hear it because air conditioners are always running down here. If I do decide to read Fahrenheit 451 this evening, I'll move inside so it's not so annoying. And I hope you guys are doing great. I hope I can figure out how to upload all of this with my iPhone instead of my computer. And now I need a new computer. Who wants to get me a new computer? Any volunteers? I really appreciate you guys. I missed you while I was gone on vacation, but I had a great time with my family, and I was really glad to spend time with them. I hope you guys continue to do great. Subscribe, ring the bell so you know when I come on live, and I will read to you next time. See ya. I don't know how to get out of this.